Pretty much near normal. That's what officials from Saskatchewan, North Dakota, Manitoba, and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service said about the snowpack conditions on the Souris-Mouse River system, the system that went wild with flooding just 2 years ago. The International Souris River Board held its spring meeting where the board would have the option of declaring that a 1 in 10 year exists, a year where the snow conditions indicated that runoff would be in the top 10% of all the years. But those reporting on the conditions said there is no current indication that we're in for a high water spring along the Mouse River in the U.S.
So far this winter, Jim Tarasenko at North Central Research Extension Center near Minot has recorded 49 inches of snow. That's 10 inches above the average for a full winter. And now there are forecasts for more snow.
Yeah, it looks like a pretty snowy few days.
Meteorologist Tom Schrader says forecast models are seeing 2 chances of measurable snow in the next several days.
Well, the first one comes in tonight and then Friday morning. It looks like up in the northern counties we could get anywhere between 4 and maybe 6 inches of snow. There could be an isolated 7-inch, but mostly 4 to 6. And that's round 1. Round 2 comes in Sunday and Sunday night. And that looks like there's more moisture in that storm, even than whatever we get tonight and tomorrow. And it'll be colder, so it should be a more efficient snowmaker.
Those projections are certainly preliminary, but the models suggest a lot of moisture for the region. If we're to get another foot of snow this weekend, our season total would surpass 60 inches. That is certainly a big number, but still well below the record set 2 years ago of 84 inches. As for the flood implications of our snowy winter, the latest snow depth maps from NOAA show that this winter may be more snowy across the Souris-Mouse River system than 2 years ago. The current snow depth estimate is on the top left. The snow depth estimate from this date 2 years ago is on the lower right. A closer look shows the difference from 2 years ago. Here's March of 2011. And now we show you the estimate as of today, with darker colors indicating a more widespread area of 20 to 30 inches of snow depth this winter in the area that drains into the Mouse and Des Lacs rivers. Calls I've received from people living in the region, places like Lignite, indicate people are seeing full ditches and high snowpacks this winter. Water releases from Lake Darling Dam were increased to 250 cubic feet per second today, a day earlier than first planned, just to make room in the lake for increased flows from Canada. Water managers with the International Souris River Board met last month and declined to proclaim this a 1 in 10 year for projected runoff, meaning they don't believe that this year's water volume will be in the top 10% of recorded flows. Of course, they can still reconsider that decision if snowfall continues late into the winter. A new flood outlook from the National Weather Service is due out next Thursday.
I'm nervous.
That's how Minot Mayor Kurt Zimbelman described his mood and the mood of many people in Minot wondering about the potential for flooding this year. But the figures released by water managers from Saskatchewan and North Dakota indicate it's not much of a concern in the city of Minot, where levees offer more protection.
It appears that the highest risk is going to be in the more rural areas, those that do not have long-held established flood protection systems. And that's where the numbers climb greatly with respect to the river getting out of its banks and creating problems.
Alan Schlag produces the bi-weekly flood outlooks for North Dakota. His counterpart in Saskatchewan told the group that the concern there is not so much of the snowpack above Rafferty and Alameda dams as it is with the area downstream of those dams, where the river leaves the province and heads into the U.S. Another concern for this spring is the late arrival of warm weather. Schlag says that can cause rapid runoff and can create overland flooding, not related to the river itself.
And of course, with the snowpack that we have, without it being coalesced and kind of refrozen into ice, I suspect it might melt very quickly.
As for the state of the Canadian dams in preparing for the spring, Saskatchewan officials report the reservoirs are where they need to be to handle the expected runoff. About 400 CFS of water is currently being released from the Canadian dams. At Lake Darling, the new higher releases have dropped the level of the reservoir below its spring operating level, making room for more water, and the gates were opened this week to release 450 CFS. Even with all of these early maneuvers to diminish the flood potential, Mayor Zimbelman told the governor he's still uneasy.
We've been getting more snow. It's getting later into the season. There's that opportunity for the quick melt, and so we're nervous.
Jim Olson, KX News. Say hello to the newest calf at the Tammy and Greg Hansen Ranch in Renville County. The little one is joining the herd at a pretty busy time. Not only because there'll be close to 200 calves here soon, but because of the river that's just over the horizon.
The whole thing's making us a little nervous.
The Hansons farm the land that's just inside the U.S., where the Mouse River begins snaking its way through North Dakota. But because of the late spring and increasing water releases from Canada, the river might just overrun these pens.
As long as possible, the cattle will stay here, yes.
While that's the hope, they're also making plans to move. They've hired a contractor to plow an area at the top of a hill nearby where the cattle could be relocated.
When he cleared that spot on the hill, then he cleared out this lot too, because we normally calve out here.
But they also are having to move all their equipment, something that's been made a lot more difficult by the deep snow.
What should have took a few hours to move out has taken a few days just because of the snow.
Lake Darling Dam began releasing 2,300 cubic feet per second of water on Wednesday afternoon into a riverbed that's beginning just north of Burlington, mainly iced over. That raises the possibility of ice jams and localized rapid rises in the river. But beyond the ice jam danger, the higher flows themselves will push the river into the minor flooding category east of Foxhome and at the Boy Scout Bridge area. Downstream of Minot, the river is predicted to rise to what's called the action stage, the zone just a foot below the minor flood stage, by early next week at places like Logan and Sawyer. And in Towner, the river is predicted to rise into the minor flood stage by late Monday. The release of 2,300 CFS from Lake Darling is being done to draw down the lake's level to about 1,593 feet. That's 2 feet lower than the lake ever reached in the spring of 2011. Hydraulic engineer Elizabeth Nelson of the Corps of Engineers says the lower target for Lake Darling is not due to any new management rules for the river system, but rather because of higher moisture levels in the snowpack draining into the river system.
We have not changed our management plan. In 2011, there wasn't as much snow water equivalent as there is in this year. So the agreement in 2011 required us to go to elevation 1,595 feet, whereas this year with the additional snow water content, we are going down to 1,593 feet.
Nelson says releases from Lake Darling will be modified if and when runoff from the Des Lacs River starts hitting the Mouse River, where those two rivers meet near Burlington.
Before the local snowmelt runs off, we will be most likely closing our gates like we have in the past in order to keep the peak lower. And then once the Des Lacs River runs off and starts to lower, we will open up our gates again to lower Lake Darling back down.
The Corps of Engineers is managing Lake Darling Dam under terms of the River Management Agreement because this is considered to be a 1 in 10 year for snowmelt within the system. Jim Olson, KX News.
Releases here at the Lake Darling Dam have been increased now to 2,800 cubic feet per second. That means that there is now more water going out of the lake than coming in from Canada for now. And I say for now because Canada has also increased its releases from the 3 dams near Estevan up to about 2,800 CFS as well. In the meantime, though, the level of Lake Darling will have a chance to drop somewhat. So for right now, it's a bit of a race here trying to get the level of Lake Darling down to the prescribed level without causing too much problems downstream. And of course, the issue downstream is that there is still a lot of ice on the Mouse River between Lake Darling and places like Minot and on to Sawyer and Velva and Towner and back up into Canada past West Hope. So it's an issue of trying to make space in Lake Darling, at the same time trying not to cause too many problems with higher flows on the river that still has quite a bit of ice on the surface.
Downstream from Lake Darling, the river is flowing freely here at Baker's Bridge, just below the dam. The water here is now lapping at the base of the bridge on County Road 8, and water is backing up to fill in low areas around the bridge. Moving downstream to Burlington, the ice has now disappeared from the Mouse River. It's flowing pretty well under the bridge at the town's east edge with plenty of levee space to handle the flow. Farther downstream, the river ice is gone at the Boy Scout Bridge, where the impacts of the ice on river levels can really be seen clearly on this hydrograph from the National Weather Service. Notice how that on Friday the river was more than 2 feet higher than it should have been given the flow indicated on the right side of the chart. But suddenly the level of the river started dropping, even though the flows had been unchanged. Well, that's when ice had left the area, allowing the river to start flowing at its normal height, given the CFS level that was moving through. Between the Boy Scout Bridge and the city of Minot, ice is still clogging the river in some places. This is the Highway 83 bypass near Tierracita Vallejo, and as of Saturday morning, there is still quite a bit of ice evident on the river. The same story is told here on 3rd Avenue Northwest near Oak Park, where water is rushing under the ice on its trip downstream. It's that water flow under the ice that's been deteriorating the ice along the river channel. And water managers are hoping that continues to happen without any major ice jams that could cause localized sudden rises in the river level. Downstream of Minot, the river is still iced over in places like Towner, while we wait for warmer temperatures to help make it all go away.
So over the next few days, while more water is going out of Lake Darling headed downstream than is coming into Lake Darling from Canada, the level of the lake will continue to drop. The question is, will it get down to that level the Corps of Engineers was hoping to get it to before the actual snowmelt portion of this spring season gets going? At Lake Darling Dam, Jim Olson, KX News.
This is what it looked like just west of Burlington on April 8, 2011. Here's what it looked like 2 years before that on April 10, 2009. The area was enduring the rapid runoff of snowmelt from the Des Lacs River Valley. And here's what that river valley looks like today.
Well, everything still froze over. I don't see any water running. Everything is iced up.
Burlington Mayor Jerome Gruenberg knows all too well what happens when a snowy winter turns to spring along the Des Lacs. The river swells suddenly, with sometimes devastating results. But normally it's happened by now. In 2013, we're still waiting to see what all this snow will produce.
This is kind of scary because this all goes right through Burlington.
Gruenberg was standing in the Des Lacs National Wildlife Refuge near Kenmare, pointing out that the valley that feeds the Des Lacs River stretches far to the north.
It goes to about to the Canadian border, pretty close. So this is a huge valley.
A few of the hilltops are bare, suggesting some snow has melted and soaked into the soil.
It doesn't look like there's a lot of runoff from that, so it's soaking in. Maybe Mother Nature will be nice to us and soak up a lot of it. But that stuff in the coulees, that's all going to come down. That's pretty sure.
And those coulees are in some places packed with several feet of snow, still waiting for a push from Mother Nature to melt and head for lower ground.
There is nothing moving here. So this is going to be a long time unless we get some really warm weather.
Farther downstream at Foxholm,
This is just getting started.
Gruenberg sees a trickle of water running in the Des Lacs, a first sign that a spring melt is arriving. He's hoping that trickle can be coaxed gradually into a manageable runoff.
And you can see it's got a long way to go. If we get a slow melt, hopefully it'll stay in the banks.
And keep from causing scenes like these along the Des Lacs River from Carpio to Burlington this spring, whenever spring arrives. Jim Olson, KX News.
Quite a bit of water.
Quite a bit of water is an understatement. Here in Logan, the snowdrifts of yesterday are the torrent of water today.
Then the biggest problem is our culvert had been mostly froze shut. So I think the more that the water flows through it, we'll get better, but now it's just kind of wait and see how high it gets before then.
So I noticed you got the shovel here. What's the plan?
We've been trying to dig out the culverts down here that have been frozen up in the center. So I've been beating in with those shovels for a while and then just clearing away whatever debris I can to keep the water going.
Jonathan McCabe is watching the water closely, hoping it'll stay where it is and not invade his garage and basement.
Between the hours of 1 and 2, we were within 6 inches going in my basement windows over here. And it's just non-stop.
This part of Logan is a few blocks away from the Mouse River, meaning these homes stayed high and dry in the record flood year of 2011.
Yeah, it's weird. We survived the 2011 flood. It doesn't get to us. But then now, because it's backed up with the ice, here we are stuck.
The water came about 50 feet from our house in 2011.
But tonight, they're right in the middle of the flooding, brought on by a snowy winter and a late spring. In Logan, Jim Olson, KX News.
Well, 19 and a half hours of chasing water.
Terry Quinlan works for the Ward County Highway Department. He spent hours erecting and removing these signs as water problems developed and then eased through the northwest and central portions of the county.
We've got some closed roads down south of Sawyer. We've got 2 roads down there. The roads have been washed out. Most of it's been overland flooding like you see here, where you have to close the roads for a while and the water goes down, then you open them back up again.
The problem started developing late Saturday and multiplied overnight into Sunday. And the high water is not all related to rivers. It's also in the normally tiny streams and coulees that are ushering to lower ground the water that's left behind from the melting of a heavy snowpack. The hills and fields of a large area southwest of Minot drain right through here, County Road 14 west of the YMCA. After rushing over and under the road, the water heads for the Green Acres subdivision, where it threatens basements as it heads for a trip under Dakota Square. Problem is, the culverts couldn't handle the flow and the water inundated 16th Street west of Dakota Square, trapping one car in the process.
Well, I'm going to go out and see if I can get it in neutral and then find some place to hook some chains and just drag it out of there.
Let her rip, huh?
Yeah.
Early Sunday morning, Kerry Green of Olson's Towing was carrying out a plan to wade into the hip-deep water, hook up a chain to the car's frame, and slowly tug the waterlogged Acura out of the pond and onto dry land. Meanwhile, the morning brought a continued rise of the Des Lacs River, a river that starts here at the Des Lacs National Wildlife Refuge near Kenmare. This is what it looked like on Sunday morning, a far cry from the scene we saw a week earlier when the stream was still a block of ice. But the ice is gone and the hills are dumping their water into the stream that rushes through Carpio and here through Foxholm, where the river's banks still had a few feet of space Sunday morning. Meanwhile, water continues to feed into the Des Lacs as it heads for Burlington, and the first place it hits is the projects area west of Burlington. This bridge was washed out by high water 2 years ago. As of Sunday morning, it was standing up to the onslaught. Other parts of the projects were also just barely above the water as residents hoped the dramatic rise of the river would end quickly. And in the town of Burlington, the Des Lacs was behaving, staying well within the levee system for now. Sunday morning ended with streams and rivers still on the rise and local residents holding their breaths in hopes the water would recede quickly after the very fast rise. Jim Olson, KX News.
Areas with moderate snow cover just kind of melted in 2 days, and we had some real high, quick peaks.
Dale Judas of the Water Security Agency in Saskatchewan says the melt in southern areas of the province has been a lot like ours in North Dakota. Fast.
It's been a very unusual runoff. We've never had one this late before, that at least not that anybody can remember.
The vast majority of the watershed has lost nearly all of its snow. This is the very start of the Souris River in Weyburn as it stood early Thursday morning. Notice the deer deciding to swim across. You can see most of the snow is gone, and there's only a few parts that still have some snow to melt.
They have quite a bit of snowpack in the top areas. The cold, they are only just starting. We think they'll probably come pretty quickly when it starts to warm up again this weekend now.
The big question that remains to be answered is, have the projections been accurate? Will this Rafferty Dam and the Alameda Dam and the Boundary Dam be able to hold back all of the water that is still to come into the reservoirs? It's a question that the Water Security Agency of Saskatchewan thinks it's answering affirmatively.
Those reservoirs still have large amounts of storage capacity, and so that water will stay in the reservoirs till the peaks are over, and then we'll let any surplus go.
Judas says it looks like overall predictions for runoff into the reservoirs in Saskatchewan are well within the range of estimates.
Probably looking like the inflows might come in a little lower than we predicted they would in early April.
For example, here at Boundary Reservoir, the peak was hit earlier this week and was lower than expected. Releases are being cut back there. At Rafferty and Alameda, the major inflow is yet to come, although there are several feet of storage available in both.
Barring some major rainfall event or something or other, we're looking pretty good in the Souris.
That's encouraging news downstream, where Lake Darling releases have restarted at about 1,100 CFS and the level of the lake is rising. As of now, the Corps of Engineers plans to keep the releases at that level through the weekend to see how the river and lake are handling the runoff. All in all, it's an encouraging outlook for the river portion of this spring's runoff season. Jim Olson, KX News. Jason Zahn has had lots of time this summer to make sure his hay hauling truck is in good shape. That's because he's been unable to cut any hay on his 1,300 acres of meadows. It's all under the water of the Mouse River.
Every acre is underwater. I mean, we've got 3-4 feet of water on every acre.
That means his hay truck could be busy this fall and winter, bringing in thousands of bales needed to keep the herd healthy.
You know, there's just so many decisions. What do? You know, where do you get your hay, or how do we come up with enough feed stocks to keep the cows that you got? So
his plan now is to try to get by on a few bales off some corn crop land, but he figures there'll be a lot of hay being hauled to ranches around Towner this winter.
It's been pretty tough on everybody.
Tough because the land can only handle a small water flow after June 1st. Before then, ranchers are happy to see water flooding the meadows. It leads to big hay crops. But when the water flow is so high that the river is out of its banks through July, like this year, all bets are off.
Oh, I think there'll definitely be some herd reductions.
He expects many ranchers to be forced to downsize their herds this year, especially since this is the second of the last 3 years with such long-lasting flooding.
Well, you can go through one, but like you said, when we had to go through in 2011, that puts a lot of financial restraint on people around here.
And even with the water dropping now, the Towner area ranchers have many questions.
How much of this land is going to be affected next year? I mean, it's been flooded out 2 years in a row, or 2011, 2013. We're wondering how much of that grass is actually going to come back.
Questions like those make for an uncertain fall and winter ahead in an area that's had flooding since April. And it gives Jason plenty of time to keep his truck in top shape. Near Towner, Jim Olson, KX News.